Hi, Tosin. Can you hear me?
Hi, Marge, I can hear you.
Okay, we'll give people some time, but thank you so much for joining.
You're welcome. No
I'm gonna
problem.
play some music in the background.
All right, that's great.
The People's Champion speaking, man. What's going on, people? It's your boy Kwam's Original, aka the People's Champion, and you're currently locked into my 006 minutes live on Coach FM. Hey, that Coach FM. I know that if you're the don't you say no more. Para the body, the body. Yo, my people, it's your favorite uncle, Uncle Eli, and you're locked into Culture FM's 006 with DJ Kwam's Original. It's phenomenal. I know that if you're the don't you say no more. Para the body, the body, money the body. Don't you say no more. Para the body, the body. People who are just joining, we're gonna play music for like 2 or 3 minutes and then we'll get started. So be patient with us. Yo, what you saying, people? DJ DJ 006 Culture FM mix. Give me the move. Give me the move. Give me the move. Give me the move. The way you dancing, you like me don't give you break. I'm a piano, not for sound and give break. I'm a piano with the carry the book. 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 You go carry the book. Carry the book. You go carry the book. Carry the book. You go carry the book. 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 Give me the move. Give me the vibe. Give me the move. Give me the vibe. Thank you guys for being here today. This is the third session of Jazeel and I's quarterly office hours. So during this time, what we typically do is we have founders come up on stage and do a quick 5-minute pitch in front of Jazz and I and a guest that we usually have with us. And today that's Oluwatosin Olaseinde. Tosin, please help me pronounce your last name properly.
So it's pronounced Olaseinde.
Olaseinde. Thank you. And so before we jump into it, we're gonna let Tosin introduce herself. I'm sure many of you on the space follow her. She's a huge influence, of course. She is the founder of Money Africa, Get Lada, and Money Africa Kids. She has a plethora of accolades that back her credibility in the work that she does to improve financial literacy for Africans. So Tosin, I will let you introduce yourself instead of me doing it. Do you mind doing that?
I don't mind. Good afternoon, good evening, everyone, depending on what part of the world you're in. My name is Oluwatosin Olaseinde. I'm the founder of Money Africa. Money Africa has one mission, and that is to walk Africans towards financial independence. We simplify financial literacy by leveraging on technology, and that's what we do. I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tosin. So, per usual, if you would like to come up and do your 5-minute pitch, feel free to raise your hand, and it'll give Tosin an opportunity to give you feedback as well as Jazz and I. But before we jump in, Tosin, what we tend to do while people are coming up on stage is just get a little bit of a better background of our guest speaker. So I know that before you started Money Africa, you were an accountant, correct?
Yes, I was.
So, can you tell us a little bit about your background, like where you went to school in the early days, what drove you to choose a profession in accounting, and what was that critical moment that made you start working on building Money Africa?
Okay, great. So I'm just gonna take us back memory lane.
Yeah.
I come from a family of five, so I have an older brother and a younger sister. I studied at Queen's College, Yaba, Lagos. For those familiar with Nigeria, that's quite one of those schools back in the days. I genuinely enjoyed, studying at Queen's College. When I turned 16, the family moved to Democratic Republic of Congo. My parents have been living there anyway, so I just went to join them. I did a bit of stint in Alliance Francaise. My French is no more as great as it used to be. Then we moved to South Africa. At South Africa, I did my A levels at Greenwich College in Branston. Then I got my first degree from the University of Johannesburg. I got my second degree from the University of South Africa. And then I joined an audit firm. That's my first proper job. And then for about 4 years, I was in audit and finance. And I truly enjoyed it. It was really interesting. But I knew for certain that I didn't want to be a partner auditor. I wanted to do something else in the finance space, but I wasn't sure. So subsequent to that, I applied for a competition at CNBC Africa. It was called the Top Traders in Africa. And then I was one of the 8 people that were selected across the whole of Africa for that show. Subsequent to that, then I moved back to Nigeria. Moving back to Nigeria, I continued to work for CNBC Africa for about 2 years, thereabout. Then I got poached by Bloomberg TV Africa to work with them as a senior financial analyst, and that was really, really interesting. It was a mixture of media and finance. And then subsequent to that, I worked with British America Tobacco as a commercial finance manager. I was managing a $20 million budget. That was really, really interesting. I got that role at the age of 27. Now, what was the defining moment for me? When I was in South Africa and I started my first job, I was living from hand to mouth. I remembered relocating from South Africa to Nigeria. I was broke. I had to go back to my parents' house, and I'd seen good money, right? But I had nothing to show for it. So pay my rent, I'd go on holidays, buy shoes, and that was pretty much it. But when it was time to move back home, there was nothing. I couldn't even afford to pay my rent when I came back to Lagos. I had to go back to my parents' house. I called my friends working at other organizations, McKinsey, banks, and the rest of that. And it was like a similar story. So these were young people, had decent jobs, but they were literally living from hand to mouth. So I had to teach myself for the next 5 years to figure out my finances. And once I figured it out, I wanted to share with the whole world. And it was not even conscious because I was just writing heavily about it. I opened an Instagram page. I was on Facebook. I just wanted to educate people about it. And then it blew up in my face. And that's how we turned it to a proper company. And then subsequent to that, now we have an edtech platform with a platform for children, an app for kids to learn how money works. And then we have the adults app, and then we have the investment arm of the business. So it all started from that personal failure in terms of managing my personal finance and then wanting to educate and tell a lot of people about it. We've reached over 1 million people online and offline, and we're on a mission to take financial literacy across Africa. I hope this helps, and I'm very happy to answer any question. Thank you.
Tosin, that's amazing. Thank you so, so much for that abbreviated background. Before I jump into, you know, questions around this, I do want to give people the opportunity to come up on stage, even if it's just to ask Tosin a question or to pitch your company. Feel free to do either. Um, but Tosin, like going back to the moment you moved back to Nigeria and had to move in with your parents. Um, can you explain a little bit more about the habits that you previously had that made it difficult for you to get your own space, even though you had a decent job?
The habit was you always just had that. See, abundance mindset can be a blessing or a curse in the sense that because you know that, oh, I'm young and healthy, I'll always get jobs. I can eat everything I have now, more will come tomorrow. And you just always keep, banking on what's going to come tomorrow. But what if something doesn't come tomorrow? Or even just missing out on the effect of compounding. So some of those habits were aggressively optimistic, which it could be a negative thing in this case. Number two was just because you can afford it does not mean you have to buy it. So there were a whole lot of things that I was buying, I was purchasing that I did not need. So for instance, I was living in a 3 bedroom apartment and I did not need that spare room. I didn't need all that space, right? As a very young person then, if I had cut down and stayed in a 2 bedroom apartment instead, I knew the amount of money I would have been saving, right? So it was being overly optimistic and just excessive. So there were lots of excesses here and there that I could have cut off. And those were some of the habits I left behind when I wanted to change for the better. Cut off the excesses. Just because I can afford it does not mean I have to buy it. And number three, being intentional about investing in the long run. So those were some of the things that helped. Another thing that also helped was actually learning how to make more money. So my qualifications, how could I position for a better job? How could I position for better opportunities? How could I earn more than I was currently making? So I was cutting my expenses and I was looking for how to increase my income. Those were the new habits that was able to take me on that journey.
Thanks a lot, Tosin, and thanks again for joining us today to share your background. Before we jump to the next question, I wanted to kind of like open up the space again to any founders who would like to come up stage, either to ask Tosin a question or to share a bit about what you're building with us today. And if you'd like to share a bit with us on what you're building, we'd love to hear a 5 minute pitch covering the name of your company, what you do, why it's important and different from everything else, why this opportunity is huge, and how you will make money. So please feel free to request, and we'll be happy to invite you back up stage. But Tosin, while we wait for folks to come up, I wanted to maybe take a bit of a pivot really towards kind of the work you've done with Money Africa, Lada, and Money Africa Kids. And I'd love to come to, as you think about your experience so far, what would you say has made you kind of successful in that initial building up of a business and brand such as these two companies?
So two things worked for us. Number one, unit economics, and number two, community. So at the beginning stage when we were building it, it was bootstrapped. And I know that as a female founder, you get access to only 2% of VC capital. Like I know that I do not have the luxury of playing a loss game or not understanding unit economics. So from the get-go, we were leaning towards just being very cautious with expenses, running a model that was unit economic sensitive. Then the next one was community. We wanted to carry along people with us and let people be able to also speak for the work. So community was very helpful, educating people and just being there. People also watch. They can tell. They can tell when you care about their own interest, where it's a win-win solution. So in as much as we're building a business, we want to make profit bottom line. We're also very intentional about carrying our people along, educating them, intentional about unit economics and looking at those numbers. So those were the two things that we've applied till date and just basically bootstrapping, growing. So Ladder is funded. We've raised about almost $500,000 for Ladder, but Money Africa has been fully bootstrapped and we've won a few grants. Another thing that has also really helped is storytelling, right? Just being able to tell your story, and that has helped us to win a few grants. Very, very people want to see the works. Let me give you a good example. Last year, at the beginning of the year, when we're having the company meeting, we said we're going to do a tour across universities in Nigeria. We've covered over 20 universities last year, just basically going to the universities, educating them and catching them young, catching them early. So that way, when they started working, they wouldn't make the same mistakes that I made. We're getting them early just before they get into the workforce. That really helped us with visibility. That helped us with social impact. But when we were doing it, we did not, it was not like a game plan that, oh, we're doing this because of social impact. We literally just wanted to reach out to those people. So building communities, being intentional about the impact that you're, garnering and just carrying people along. So those were the things that we've done that has helped us over the years.
Justin, thank you so much for that. And I actually want to pull two threads there for the founders that are in our audience. But before I do that, I just want to again remind folks that have joined us that Matthew, Marge and I are hosting a bi-weekly office hours that we do every other week on Wednesdays. How to invite founders to come up stage to either share your 5 minute pitch, where we'd like to hear the name of your company, what you're building, what makes opportunity different, why this market is huge and how you make money. And while we wait for you to come up to us, I want to maybe pull two threads there, one on the unit economics and the other on storytelling. You mentioned that with as a female founder, access to capital is a lot limited, and so you began your journey thinking about unit economics. When you think about as founders who are starting their business, thinking about how they get money in the business, how they think about cost, what are some of the things that you advise them to do to focus on building a strong unit economics business from the start?
So I was tweeting the other day that maths is going to save you, right? You really, really have to understand your numbers. I understand that a lot of people say, "Oh, I don't like numbers," or "I don't like math," but to be honest, to be a successful business person, you really have to understand it. So things like, for instance, is this what part of the business yields more revenue or gives us better bottom line? You're tracking everything. What is a sunk cost? Sometimes people have spent so much money on a project, but because they've spent that much money, they continue to go in that direction, but sunk cost lets you know that, listen, it's gone. Stop looking back. You can pivot, you can divert and move to the next level. But again, monitoring the numbers does that for you. You're able to know, if we're taking loan, can we afford it? Is this credit that we can actually afford? Can we make more money on the credit we've taken compared to if we do not take credit? So all those things, understanding those numbers is very, very, very helpful. Another thing is this: carry your entire team along. So I remember, even from about 2 years ago, that's when we started doing that. Almost everybody on the team is a salesperson. We let them know, this is how much revenue we made this month. This is how we fell short. This is what we need to do. And you're also getting input from everybody in the organization. So the numbers, you have to be very, very, you have to be on top of it. So at any given time, what is my runway? How much time do I have? And if there's anything wrong, carry your team along. Let them know what's going on. So those numbers, I don't play with it. And the team also, and also because you've trained them to start having that insight of always looking at the numbers, they also start responding to those numbers. So it's teamwork. So that's my feedback regarding numbers. I'm very big on always educating business owners. Please do not play with those numbers. Don't let anything catch you unawares. You want to be on top of your numbers. Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Tosin. And I agree with you, especially as an investor. One of the things that I'm always looking at is how sustainable is this business? If you're selling a dollar for 90 cents, you're already in a terrible place. But maybe we'll take a bit of a gear shift away from kind of numbers to less tangible stuff. You mentioned the value of storytelling, and recently there's been a lot of conversation around whether or not storytelling is valuable for founders and whether founders should be focused on product and the story itself will be told around them. You mentioned some values already, some valuable things that have come out from storytelling, but what would you say to founders who are trying to figure out where storytelling fits into their business and whether or not they should be focused on that?
Okay, great. Now, the beautiful thing about storytelling is that we all have different stories. If you've looked at almost all the interviews I've had, like in the last 5 years, it's the same thing. Like, oh, I got my first job at the age of 20 or 20/21, and I was struggling with my finances. I was able to educate myself, and that's why I wanted to share with other people. People can connect, they can relate. Now, another person's story could be different. People can connect, they can relate. They want to know your story, they want to know what is buzzing behind those pictures, those videos, those images. Storytelling is very helpful. And even if the storytelling is not just of the founder or of the team, it could also even be storytelling of the users, right? People are inspired by what other people that are using your platform are actually doing with it. And you'll be amazed that people are willing to give you their story, right? So in the early days, we had people who had never invested for the first time, people that were struggling with insurance plan, and they were sharing these stories with us that this is what I did. Oh, thanks to you guys, I started my first investment. Thanks to you guys, I'm earning more money. Thanks to you guys, I have an insurance plan. So if as a founder, even if you're not telling your own story, go ahead and tell the stories of the users. But it's very important that the storytelling is there. People want something else behind the pictures, behind the images, behind the branding. They want more. They want to feel the pulse and the blood behind it. And that's where storytelling comes into play. And there's no one way to tell stories. Stories can be told in different numerous ways. For me, then, was wearing red lipstick and doing 1 minute videos. For other people, it could be blogging, it could be anything, but the story has to be out there, and you have to decide what story works best for you. And also, remember, you can experiment. So just start with something, tweak it, and continue to tweak it until you get what is a perfect fit. And don't forget to ask your users what they like, right? So let me give you a good example. When we used to tell our story, then we ask them what resonates with you. I noticed that 70% of our users are actually women. When we tell stories about walking towards retirement, creating trust fund for your children, oh my gosh, there's spikes in the response in those numbers. That shows that they're able to connect. They're thinking of their kids. They're thinking of retiring, right? So you also look at who are our users and what story hits their nerves. What story is piquing their interest. So yeah, that's what we've done over the years.
Thank you so much for that, Tosin, and giving like really great examples that people can pick up and use. I did want to ask you a little bit back about the early days when you're just starting out building your community and getting on socials. I assume that you were still like working your previous job while you were starting to build your social presence. Is that correct?
Yes, you're correct.
Okay, and so how did were you were consistent, I assume, or like how did you get to a point where you're like, this is the cadence that I need to build traction, and then how did you turn that traction into an actual product? Like,
Okay, great. So I turned 30, and in a spirit of transparency, I had saved enough to last me for a year if I was going to go out of work. So I turned 30. I wanted to do something different, so I thought I was taking 6 months break from work, and I was going to go back, and I just started Money Africa. But I had savings, so I had peace knowing that, what, there's a backup plan. So I was just educating, building the business, and just telling people about financial literacy and building structure. Then one of the associations of the insurance companies in Nigeria reached out to us, and they said, you know what, we wanted you to share something about this, send us an invoice. I sent them a really ridiculous inflated invoice, and they budged. They didn't budge. They honored it, and that was it. So I was like, the demand is here. People want what we're doing. In 6 months, we blew up from 0 followers to 20,000 followers. So we knew that there was something in this. And that's how I called the lawyer and I said, please, let's register this. And I shelved my plans of going back, and I started building out. So now we have a team of 20, from a one person with a phone across her face, and we've built out structure, and we have these apps in the market and all of that. So it was more of the savings really did help. It just gave us that little, footing on knowing that at least I can pay rent, I can pay my bills, and then the business started, becoming fruitful. So those are the things that helped from turning the business from an idea into a product.
got you. And then I'm taking note of what you're saying. You keep saying we. Who is we in those early days?
Okay, great. In the early days, it was myself, and then my sister was very, very helpful and very supportive. But I'm a solo founder. Then gradually, I employed first employee, and then we started adding more people onto the team. So that's the we. So initially, it was myself, and then as time went on, it was the team.
Got you. And I think for the founders who are listening, I think there's some really great lessons in what Tosin is saying right now. So, for example, she had saved enough money to be able to focus on building for a year without, saved enough money to leave her job for a year to build, to give herself the mental real estate to focus on her product. And I think that that's a really good example of what many founders could do if you are employed right now is saving to bootstrap, and giving yourself time to raise financing within that 12 months before you might have to go back to work versus assuming that right away you can raise financing. So what can you do to give yourself a little bit of runway on your own by financing it on your own, to get going? So Tosin, that's really, really a great point that you brought up. Um, Kind of shifting gears a little bit, you've been, a major part of the African tech ecosystem for some time now, and I'm sure you've seen and met many different founders. From your experience, what distinguishes African startups that successfully secure their first round of angel funding from those that don't?
Number one is the team. People want to see what you've done in the past, right? So from those that I know, like my peers and my friends that have raised funds, the team is like the people themselves, because people invest first in the people before they invest in the business. That is very key. Number two is that they're looking at the total addressable market. Is this idea big enough for the investors to get their money back? They also want to invest in something that they think is going to be mid to high growth businesses. And then number three, they also want to look at execution. So let's say you spoke to an investor in January about something, they come back in June. Has there been any growth in those 6 months? So how are you able to execute? Have you been able to close any new clients, new partnership, or things like that? And you can just even sort of see the fire and the hunger in their eyes. Because of the nature of my work, I get a lot of people that come to the DM to pitch and just let me know about things. And from speaking to them, you can sort of tell who is going to go far and who is not going to. The hunger, the fire, even with a crappy product, if you have the right team, they can pivot in the long run, right? They can always change to something else that will garner that traction and that interest. So the team is very, very key. Those are the things that I've seen in businesses that ended up being successful.
Okay, and by the time you went on to raise financing for GitLadder, you had a reputation for being able to build, correct?
Yes, it did. It was very helpful that we had started with Money Africa, that we had followers, we had a mailing list, we had some traction. So they knew that, we've shown workings of what is possible. So it was helpful for us to be able to have raised the fund that we did.
And so when you went out to market to raise, what was that process for you? Obviously, you had the credibility, so you probably already had a network of folks to talk to, but like walk us through what made you decide to go to market for GitLadder. Who were the first people that you decided to talk to get funding for, and why? To get funding from, and why?
Okay, great. So the first people we went to speak to get funding from was an accelerator called the ODX. ODX gave us $125,000. Those were our first investors. We spoke to them because they were interested in investing in founders, in products across the world. Out of all of us selected, just I think of about five companies were from Africa, from Nigeria, and many others from the US, Europe, and different parts of the world. So we chose them because they were innovative and they were looking at investing in founders across the world, working on interesting projects. Now, how did we? We went around two different rounds, investing rounds. Interview rounds for us to have gotten to the final stage. And it was very, very helpful. We went to New York to meet with the founders and for the other peers across the world as well. Our second investor is a financial institution in Nigeria. They gave us $250,000. We approached them because we had worked with them in the past and it was a successful work. They could see the future, what we're trying to build and who we're trying to attract. Also, we could see some synergy between us in terms of their licenses and how we could partner for the future. So they could see the similarities, they could see the licensing partnership, they could also see the work that we've done and the workings. So those are our two investors, and that was the reason why we approached them and we chose them and they also chose us. And interestingly, the funding round took between the spacing of both investors was about 8 months, right, for us to have closed those two investors. And it was quite an interesting period. Now, for a bit of context, though we have two investors, we had spoken to over 50. So it's a numbers game. So reach out for those listening and trying to find investors, spread your net wide, sell your moat to what you're building, why you think you're going to be here for a long while, total addressable market, and the team that you have. But it's also a numbers game. So you want to shoot as many times as you can.
Thank you so much for that, Tosin. I'm sure, something that you said that was really important was, the fact that raising is a numbers game. You're talking over 50 investors. Raising from just those two took about 8 months. And I'm sure some of the folks in the audience, if you follow myself or Jazeel, and I see my good friend Isaac as well in the space, as well as Tosin, I'm sure you've seen a lot of investors tweet about the fact that it does take time to raise. It could take 6 to 12 months or even longer. And so I'm glad Tosin brought that point up in this discussion as someone who has a lot of credibility, that has built Money Africa prior to going out to raise GitLadder. It even took her that long to raise her round of financing. Um, And so before I pass it on to Jazeel, I just want to remind founders that if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand and come up on stage and ask Tosin any questions. Or if you would like to come up and pitch what you're working on, feel free to do so as well. If you do come up and pitch, we would love to hear about the name of your company, what your company does, why it is important and different from everything else, why the opportunity is huge, and how you make money. Until then, I'll pass it to Jazz to ask a couple of questions.
Thanks, Marge. Tosin, maybe I'd love to maybe shift gears a bit. You've mentioned quite a few things that you've dealt with as you built your company. As you look back to kind of the journey from leaving your job to building Lada and Money Africa to where it is at today, what have been the best resources, networks, or folks that you think founders who might be in a similar position should need to know or look to get connected to?
Okay, so YC has this body of work that people that are not even that did not get into their program, or even those that have got into their program, get access to. It's very, very helpful, very resourceful. I love the platform and all the resources that one is able to get from it. Also, another one is your peer to peer. Ask them to even do introductions for you. So when we were also fundraising, a few of our friends that had fundraised, I asked them, oh, please, can you do an intro for me? Whenever those intros are done by people that they've invested in, it's a warmer introduction and there's a higher chance of it yielding fruit, even though it didn't work for us, but it's something that was very helpful. I noticed that how they responded when it was an introduction by someone that they knew was different from when it was just a blank open shot. So leverage on your peer to peers or your peers and get them to help you with introductions. Another resource that I found very, very helpful is actually researching, right? There's a lot of information out there, and you'll be really, really, really amazed about the number of information out there. Some of them were paid for research, some of them were free research that was freely available. So you have to leverage everything that is at your fingertips before you actually say, oh, there's nothing out there. So the YC body of work was very helpful. The peer-to-peer introduction and networking, and also the research that we had to do. Those were the resources that I found very, very helpful on this journey.
That's really helpful. I think, especially on the YC piece, very useful to know that it's available to every founder, not just those who got into a program. And I'd actually love to maybe chat a bit about your operations specifically, Tosin. You mentioned that you started on socials and then you've now built a tech platform. What are some of the things you tell to a founder who's looking to position their business to be ready to scale from the work that you've done with Lada Money Africa so far?
Okay, great. So for founders that are looking to scale, there are so many low-hanging fruits that you can use to start, right? When I was in Egypt last year, I went for a VC hangout, and I met a VC that invested in a founder that was using WhatsApp to reach their users. Like their platform was WhatsApp. And I was so shocked because I remember in the early days when we started, we were using low hanging fruits that were free, things like WhatsApp group, Telegram groups, social media. And many investors then didn't take you seriously because they felt like, oh, you didn't have your own platform. So it was like, oh, it was just socials, and they didn't take you seriously. But the tide has changed, and now you're seeing that people are then talking more now, like, oh, consider this social media platform. So where am I going? You can start with your low hanging fruits. If you're building the community, you can use WhatsApp, you can use Telegram, you can use Instagram, you can use any of those low hanging fruits. And as you grow, you can go out to build your own platform. So when we first started, that is where we were before we built our EdTech platform, before we built the Kiddies app, before we built, the Ladder investment app. Those were the things that we were using. And you'd be so amazed. I know of a few founders, I'm not going to call numbers, that are doing over $500,000 to $1 million using those channels. So if you don't yet have the money to build out your own platform, these are low hanging fruits that you can actually use, and investors are investing as long as you show your numbers. So don't be afraid and don't sleep on those things. So yeah.
That's very helpful, Tosin. Thank you. And I see we have a founder that's come up, D'Angelo. D'Angelo, thanks for coming up. Just as a reminder, if you'd like to come on stage and pitch your company, we'd love to hear your pitch within 5 minutes. Please share the name of your company, what you do, why it's important and different from everything else, why the opportunity is huge, and how you make money. So, D'Angelo, please feel free to come off mute and share with, a bit with us on what you're building.
Hey everyone, thank you for this platform. I think is really great. So yeah, my name is D'Angelo Smith, and I'm the founder of Driven. We make it easier for lawyers and clients to manage billing through like our digital wallet. Some of the issues that we see is that lawyers spend over 30% of their time on administrative tasks, sort of like billing and invoicing. And for solo practitioners, it can be much higher. And so efficient billing management can help reduce like the burdens on lawyers to focus more on their legal work, which in turns increases their revenue. Uh, so like today there's many billing software companies for law firms, but some of the things that they lack is like modern user experience, instant payments and installment loans, which we've been seeing with the increase of BNPL and SaaS businesses. We just watched that with Apple. And so I do believe that payments is a succeeding industry. All business isn't like this zero sum, winner take all. I believe in the payments industry. And there's like $18 billion industry in specifically in legal payments. And so we're working today with four law firms that we have letters of intents with, and we make money through transaction fees and affiliate marketing.
D'Angelo, thank you so much for that. So just if can make sure that I got it clearly. This is a fintech platform specifically for law firms to process payments through, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so Tosin, what we typically do is we let our guests ask our founders follow-on questions first about what they're building. So if you have any questions for D'Angelo, please feel free to dig deeper.
All right, great. Quick question. What percentage is the revenue on transaction fee and what percentage is revenue affiliate marketing? And depending on which one is bigger, why?
That's a great question. I don't know yet. I have ran some like financial models and things of that nature to sort of like calculate unit economics, and some of the sweet spots that we found and which we pitched to our potential partners were 4.9% transaction fee per transaction, and then for the affiliate marketing it was 20% for affiliate marketers. So it's sort of like the transaction fees are waived, but in turn they also get the affiliate marketing throughout the wallet. So sort of like if you can think of like Klarna or a firm where they'll market a product, instead we market the attorneys, where folks can find lawyers that they're looking to work with, and then also be able to use our platform like a wallet to make those payments.
Thank you.
Tosin, any other questions?
No, that's it from me.
Okay. So D'Angelo, you said you're working with four law firms to pilot, and you're just piloting the payments processing part with them?
Yeah, so we just piloting the wallet and payments, the payments side of things with them. They were particularly what I see more so the interests were from the legal financing, sort of like the buy now pay later for legal financing. So that was really the sweet spot of where we seeing like a lot of folks being interested in signing up with us.
Okay. And when did you actually start building this and start trying to acquire those four customers?
Yeah, so this was around April is when I made a pivot. I want to say literally the first month of April, we made a pivot. We actually started out with financing traffic fines or fees. We were pretty much in the government sector, but government moves a lot slow. So as a startup, we want to move with speed, and we sort of did that by tracking like our KPIs and things of that nature. And literally, it's like this sort of like fell into our lap because it just made sense for our previous customers that we had that were like B2C. So like we started out financing traffic tickets where folks will owe like $1,000 worth of traffic tickets or whatever, and they would actually pay us to like break it down into installments. And then we tried to scale it, but like I said, governments were moving super slow. And also some of our customers, what we found was they'll pay off their traffic fines or fees, but in some situations even if you paid it off, they were considered misdemeanors. So you had to see a judge, and some of these folks were looking for lawyers to represent them, but they actually didn't have the money to hire an attorney.
Okay. And so, how are you planning to like manage bad debt for this? Like, for example, you saw that Apple had, launched a buy now, pay later feature, and then they ended up redacting it and getting it out of market. So, what is your plans to make sure that, regular customers pay back their loans to these lawyers?
Yeah, so I think risk management is really important, and I think that is actually like the strength of buy now pay later. I started to realize that buy now pay later is more of a feature and not necessarily a product. It's the underwriting that's the product. So that's a what we've been doing is really diving deep into using platforms such as Plaid, where we can dive into a customer's cash flow history to determine their ability to pay back. But then we got smacked across the head where we were looking into, okay, it's a difference between someone's ability to pay back and their willingness to pay back. And so we've been more so focused on our personal injury attorneys, where the financing is less recourse, and there's more opportunity because there's really no usury laws around that. So just being able to offer fair pricing is a huge advantage.
Got you. No, D'Angelo, that's
Hello.
We can hear you.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear Marge. It sounded like she broke up.
Hey guys, so sorry about that. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay, okay. So what I was saying, D'Angelo, is that from what you're articulating, you know the space very well, and so that's very clear, in how you're speaking about it. I think that as you start to service these pilot clients, and just I think it's going to take a little bit of time to kind of just understand the behavior of folks paying back the loans, what other features within the product that makes sense for both the law firms and people that will use the platform. I think it's going to just take a little bit of testing, scaling, and traction for you to see how things proceed and what you're building. I don't know, Tosin, if you have any feedback on what you heard from him, but those are some of my initial points of feedback so far.
My feedback is, how are they using storytelling to drive traction or to be able to get more users? Yeah.
Yeah, were you asking like how is the storytelling to get more users?
Yes, like do you apply that already?
Um, you know what? To be honest with you, I need to get better with storytelling. It's something that I want to practice and learn more. I think that initially the market just responded. Um, but primarily because, like you said, like I did a lot of market research into, one of the things that I learned about selling was to not sell things, but to find alignment with people that want your product. And I think that that's what we found is that lawyers, want better cash management, and clients want, more affordable and accessible payment options. And so that was something that I think we found alignment with. I think my biggest challenge right now, obviously, is fundraising. With having partners that are, ready to test our launch and willing to pay. I guess my biggest question would be, how can I align myself with investors or find investors that are willing to invest in this space, so that we can start generating some real traction, which is, obviously, revenue.
Okay, I think that will go towards Marge, and yeah, Marge, I think you should be able to answer that.
Yeah, sure.
I can
Yeah,
jump
Jazz, go
in.
ahead, please.
Go
Please
ahead, Mike.
just take this one.
Okay, as long as you're sure. D'Angelo, it's a great question, difficult question. I'd say that you are kind of early. You mentioned four customers. You're testing your pilot. I will be candid and say that it would be tricky to get an investor this early, given kind of like where you are at right now. I think the pivot in April makes sense. I think you've progressed a lot. I think four customers is nothing to sneeze at. It's really critical. I think that that's going to prove the value proposition of your model. What I will suggest is perhaps you start to look at individual investors. So there's a lot of like angel syndicate groups that exist, especially in the US. I know, for example, Gil has one with Vitalize VC that's around the future of work. That might be something that could be interesting to them. But I suggest you almost like align your focus towards individual angel groups, because I do think there's some questions that any investor will ask you that are fair questions, but are not. It's not your fault that you won't have the answer because it's too early. I think some of those questions, at least in my mind, would be like, how do we go from 4 to 40 lawyers? How do we go from 40 to 500 lawyers? Because selling SaaS software in America it's a cool thing, but it's really difficult to do unless the value prop is as painful as possible. And lawyers, and when you talk about lawyers, like which kind of lawyers? I'm talking about individual lawyers, more enterprise clients. I think those are questions you probably figure out over time. So I'd almost advise you not to spend too much time trying to answer this question with institutional investors, because the metrics that at least I would be looking for, you wouldn't be able to have them right now. I don't think it's fair to you to have that question. So I suggest you try to look at angel groups, people that invest in syndicates, perhaps even looking within the lawyer associations themselves. There's a lot of lawyers these days that do individual angel checks. So perhaps as you're thinking about potential customers, you could think about how to pitch some of them as potential investors into your solution. Um, I'd say those are things I'd suggest you focus on now. Beyond kind of investor, I think to Tosin's earlier point, if there is a way to not sell a dollar for 90 cents and for you to be able to kind of get revenue in the door with these four customers, I spend a lot more time on that than trying to find runway to build a business, because I do think that if your business is a strong business, the value prop is painful enough for people, for those followers to pay you something for it, and you're able to build an initial business around that, it gives you a lot more options when investors come to the table. So you're not selling too much of your company because people want you to prove things out a bit more. So I'd actually probably suggest that as you talk to angels, I think makes sense. You also try to figure out how do we make this a revenue generating business with the strong unit economics from day one. And I know there's a lot of people say that you can't build a tech business on profitable metrics, and maybe you can't. But I do think that like I'm just an old school person. Like business is profit and loss, and so if you're making money, it's good, and the rest of it you figure out. So this is probably my suggestion to you is that deprioritize institutional investors, because you might spend a lot of time chasing your tail with people who just won't be able to get there to back your company. I hope that's helpful. I know it feel like it was a bit roundabout.
No, I appreciate that. I think you're spot on with that. I haven't really dove into the investor networks, so I'll make sure that I spend a little bit more time in that area, like you say, so that way I can prove out a lot of more of these metrics, and then in the long run, it'll be a lot better for me, because then like you said, I'll be able to answer those questions and maybe get better terms for investments.
And D'Angelo, just for context, I want to ask Tosin, a quick question. Tosin, when you went to raise for Lada, how many users did you have on the Money Africa platform?
On the Money Africa platform, we had over 15 to 20,000 users on the Money Africa platform when we went to raise for
Okay,
Ladder.
and then how many social followers did you have at that time?
We had over 300,000 social followers. So our mailing list was over 100,000. So we really had, quite some traction. So from paid users to mailing list and all of that.
Yeah, and so D'Angelo, the reason why I'm bringing that up is that while Tosin ended up doing an accelerator program as well as raising financing from an investor when she went to build Lada, she had built another platform called Money Africa that she bootstrapped, and then she had a really large social following. So some of those customers were going to convert to Lada. We not sure how many, right? But like there was some level of confidence that she could convert some of those 300,000 that were on social, 100,000 in her newsletter, um, and 20,000 that were already using Money Africa to this other platform, which did help build confidence in her ability to drive customer acquisition to this other platform. So Tosin, I know we're coming up on the end of our space. We only have 9 minutes left. Um, and I think what makes you really unique is your ability to acquire customers in the way that you've done it through building community. So I just want to harp on that one more time. Customer acquisition is everything when you're building a business because you need paid customers to drive revenue and scale, right? So Tosin has done that through building community on socials and has done an amazing job of that. So Tosin, as we kind of round out, let's leave founders with some. Oh, actually, before we round off Tosin, I think we have one more person that wants to come up. Let's let Franklin. Franklin, do you have a question for Tosin, or did you want to very, very quickly in 3 minutes pitch what you're working on? Franklin, are you able to come off mute and talk? Okay, so Tosin, um, to wrap it up, I want you to share, let's say, maybe 3 points of advice for founders that are in the earliest stages of building right now that you wish you would have known when you were starting out.
Number one, I allowed the community to just grow on its own, to be honest. In the early stages, I was not aggressive about, like, it just grew, right? So let me give you an example. For like 3 days, I wasn't able to come online. I was down with malaria or something. And there were people that were answering questions and dictating and helping people in the comment section. So that means they already understand your business. They know what exactly you're doing, right? And that's a community. So sometimes I was like, oh my gosh, I wish I was more aggressive about community building in the early days because those are your soldiers. If people are there pitching your business on your behalf, educating other people about it, those are your army. Reward them, right? Big companies sometimes do that. They sometimes give you referral fees or something. So look for a way to find them, appreciate them, reward them. Them word of mouth goes a very long way. You don't want to sleep on that. Number two, your existing customers, it's cheaper for you to retain them than to acquire new users. So be very intentional about creating new. In our work, we a lot of content is a lot of our growth is content driven. So ensure that the content is not stale. You get new content. You're keeping your existing users happy, before you go chasing for new ones. And then the third one is, you as a founder, you also need help. So don't forget to don't sleep on your peers. Find them out, help each other, and then you grow together. Let me give you an example. You might know the founder of Shotlers, Dami, doing incredible work in the transport business in Nigeria, and that space is very hard to crack. We've been friends for almost 7 years. I remember our early days, even way before this, and it's just so beautiful to have seen her grown over the years. So it's the investment we've made in each other from those baby years that we did not even see what our business was going to grow and look like today. So don't sleep on your peers. Support them, encourage them. They will tell you about opportunities. And the last but not the least, I know I'm supposed to say just three. The fourth one is, especially as a woman founder, there are quite some grants out there for you. Apply to those grants. Last year, we applied for over 70 opportunities when it comes to those kind of grants, and we got only three. So it's a numbers game as well. You're telling good story, you're shooting it out, you're applying for those grants, go get them. So yes, those are my four tips for people just starting out. Thank you.
Okay, and then last question, Tosin. You had to have come up on like some difficult times throughout this process of building Money Africa Kids and LADA. Can you talk through like the mental resilience that you've had to maintain?
The tough time has to be getting our engineering right. Oh my gosh. We rebuilt the engineering team three times till we finally got it right. Please don't poach our CTO. It took us, we had to do it three times before we finally got it right. I have background in finance. I'm a finance baby. I love my finance so much, but my tech side is somewhere where we needed to, fortify. And it took us, it was quite challenging before we finally found the right team and we have the proper grounding now. So that's like one challenge that we faced over the years.
Perfect, Tosin. Thank you so much for your valuable time coming here to participate in Jazz and I's office hours. For folks that are new here, Jazz and I host these office hours typically bi weekly on a quarterly basis for 2 months and a quarter. And so we really appreciate you joining us to hear more about Tosin and her story and how she's built. And D'Angelo, thank you so much for also coming up on stage and being willing to share what you're building. Um, we have another session on July 3rd. That's going to be with Ife. He is the ex CTO of Kobo 360. He's another founder as well, now turned investor. But Tosin, where can everyone find you? Of course, on Twitter, but is there anything that you would like them to go check out before we close out today?
Okay, great. So we launched an app for children. It was in November last year. We got into the Mastercard EdTech Fellowship. That came with $100,000 grant, and that was very helpful with us building out our app for kids. We want to go after over 1 million children across Africa and teaching them about financial literacy. So think of animated cartoons, leadership board. If you've been on Duolingo, think of Duolingo, but for financial literacy, targeting children. So if you know of any parents, anybody having children between the ages of 6 to 17, please tell them about the app. Check it out. I love it. I think that's like the our work that I'm currently obsessed with. And yeah, so thank you.
Thanks, Tosin, and thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your afternoons and evenings, and we will catch up with you soon.
Thank you for having me. I had a great
Thanks,
time.
Tosin. All right, Jazz, catch you later.
Thanks, Tosin. Catch everyone later. Bye, March.